And I think another thing is I'm not afraid of narratives, right? And I specifically say the word narrative because it's kind of a dirty word in Dynasty. And you mentioned PhD statisticians. I'm actually a humanities PhD. So I'm working on my dissertation in performance studies. So I kind of traffic in narratives, right? But all narratives is their rhetorical context, right? They're assigning context to a specific opinion that serves an argumentative purpose, right? So, if you think about a rookie receiver coming in, Garrett Wilson, for instance, he's a player I'm really high on, even though from an analytic perspective, his market share of receiving yards isn't necessarily hitting benchmarks that we'd want to see coming off of his junior year. But understanding the narrative, right, that he's sharing the field with two other potential first round receivers in Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba, some might call that context, right? I call it a narrative, and it's convincing to me. So I think kind of one of my primary missions in the Dynasty space is to reclaim the legitimacy of narratives as Dynasty analysis. There's not enough humanities guys and artists in this space. So,
yep.
We've talked about this a little bit already, but I think strategy is probably the biggest place to build the biggest edge as a Dynasty player, a little bit over player evaluation. So I spend more of my time thinking about what are the market inefficiencies in my league, where can I exploit them by making trades, and kind of getting in and out at the right time of players. And that's how you ultimately build dynasties.
I was laughing there because in my wide receiver video, I fell beholden to the analytics around Garrett Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And coming in with a clean slate, I put him as my number 8 wide receiver.
Okay.
Because as you said, those metrics were I was shocked. I thought he would be in my top 3 coming in. And when I looked at those metrics, I was like, holy crap, this is scary, man. This is exactly what the analytics community, when you look at the historical context, players with those metrics are, they don't have a fantastic hit rate. Mm-hmm. But that narrative, and yeah, I don't call it narrative, I call it context. For me,
I just love the word narrative. So I think we should keep it. But yeah, go ahead.
What I fear about the word narrative is that if you say narrative, it feels kind of like a story that people just believe because it's told to them. Mm-hmm. Versus context is in my mind, when you tell someone what something is and you also give them facts alongside it to help them understand whether something is as good as it seems or whether it's worse. But nonetheless, that's all semantic. I totally hear you about making sure that you have that extra information beyond the one data point or beyond the trend in given one dimension, like BMI, for instance. That's one part of the story that lets you build the entire context or narrative around that player. I think that's a really good call out.
Yeah. And I know we're talking running backs today, but with Garrett Wilson coming into the college season, he was my wide receiver 1. And what I said on TLG before the season is I want to see him take a step forward in terms of market share of receiving yards. I want to see him take a step forward in terms of yards per team pass attempt. And he didn't necessarily do that, right? So I'm having to backtrack a little bit on that in my process, but also recognizing that, Jackson Smith and Jigba star kind of rising at the end of the year and Olave still being a solid prospect, I'm kind of forgiving him a little bit. So yeah.
So it sounds like you are not really on one side of the film versus analytics train. I know that generally, when I brought folks onto the show, they mentioned that they take everything into consideration. But, DF Bean Counter, Drew Osenchuk, when we had him on the show about a year ago, he told us, I take into account some film things, but, I really, really lean into trying to get everything down to a numeric formula. Other guys that we've had on the show, they say, well, we take into consideration a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I find your positioning to be really interesting because you're saying I'm a data guy, but I'm probably indexing a lot less on data than a lot of other guys who view themselves as data guys.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I want to find a handful of data points that I think are predictive of success in the NFL, whether that is for current NFL players or for prospects, right? And I use data guys like Drew, like Peter Howard, right? Like Cooper Adams. I use their insights in order to find what those metrics are. And then I feel like as a humanities PhD, my primary practice is citation, right? So I try to gather all of the information I have from all of the really smart people around me and come up with what I feel like is a totalizing or, you know, complete picture of a player from my perspective, right? And I think where maybe I add to the I think maybe where I add to the whole process is that I'm able to conglomerate those things, right? And construct, you know, a cohesive argument about why I think a player should be ranked higher, should be ranked lower. You should take this player earlier in your rookie draft or later, right? So I'm very deferential. I try to like conglomerate as much information as I can, and then build an argument from there. So I think you're right. I wouldn't call myself one or the other. I don't think I'm enough of an expert in either to really call myself one or the other, but I am good at bringing information together and coming up with a strategy that I think has been successful in my leagues.